My diabetic son nearly died when his dentist called him a liar and refused him glucose during a medical crisis. Then she weaponized CPS and got me fired when I spoke up. But her own staff secretly documented everything, and we orchestrated her complete downfall. I was at the clinic with my son when I heard his dentist scream in pain. I turned my head and saw my son crying while sprinting out of his office. He'd been looking forward to getting his cavities filled for weeks, so I was extremely confused. I found him in the parking lot curled up behind our hit-up Honda, shaking so hard I thought he was having a seizure. When I tried to touch him, he flinched away from me like I was going to hurt him. This was the same little boy who gave himself insulin shots every day without complaining. Something was seriously wrong. It took me 45 minutes sitting on that hot concrete to get him calm enough to speak. Even then, the words came out in broken pieces between hiccups and snot bubbles. And when he finally got it out, my blood went cold. They held me down. I couldn't breathe. My glucose monitor was beeping and she turned it off, he said, voice shaking. John had been managing his diabetes since he was 5. He knew the signs of low blood sugar better than most adults, and he'd never lie about needing his glucose tablets. I tried to stay calm while he told me the rest, but my hands were shaking. Dr. Henderson had called him a liar when he said he needed his tablets. Said his mother probably taught him that trick to get candy. When he showed her his medical alert bracelet, she laughed and said all the Medicaid kids try that excuse. Then it got worse. John started crying harder when he told me he'd wet himself when his blood sugar crashed, right there in the middle of the treatment room with other kids watching through the open door. Dr. Henderson had announced loudly that this is what happens when children don't cooperate. She made him sit there in his soaked clothes while they finished the cleaning. My baby dissociated. That's the word the hospital doctor used later. He just went somewhere else in his head while they kept working on him. Even though his glucose monitor was screaming and he was shaking and sweating and clearly in medical distress, I called my brother Malcolm, who worked security at the hospital, and told him to get here now. When he arrived, John was barely responsive. His blood sugar was 42. The ER doctor said we were lucky we got him there when we did. Malcolm went with me the next morning to that dental office, and I've never seen him so angry. He had the hospital paperwork showing John could have died. Could have gone into a coma right there in that dental chair while Dr. Henderson was too busy teaching him a lesson to provide basic medical care. The office manager tried to blow us off saying they were too busy to write up an incident report. Malcolm asked if they were too busy or too worried about liability. That's when things got interesting. Dr. Henderson came out of her office all high and mighty talking about how John was manipulative and violent, how his mother probably coached him, how these people always want to sue for money. Malcolm asked her quietly which people she meant exactly. I've been practicing for 30 years. I know all the tricks, she exclaimed. Medicaid patients don't appreciate quality care, and it's not my fault that some communities just don't prioritize dental hygiene either. But that's when I had my never interrupt your enemy while they're making a mistake moment, because she mentioned her husband was on the hospital board, and maybe our family should be careful. Malcolm was recording the whole thing on his phone. Within hours of posting that video, everything started falling apart. My phone rang while I was making John his favorite comfort food, mac and cheese with extra butter. It was my supervisor at the nursing home. Budget constraints, she said. Hours being cut across the board. I'd been there 6 years without a single complaint, but suddenly I was down to 2 shifts a week. When I mentioned needing full-time work to keep John's insurance active, she got quiet. Then she mentioned her sister-in-law worked at a dental office, Dr. Henderson's office. Malcolm called me 20 minutes later. Administrative leave pending a performance review. He'd worked hospital security for 8 years. Never had a write-up, but now they were digging through old footage looking for violations. His supervisor seemed genuinely uncomfortable delivering the news, kept apologizing and saying it came from above, way above. The apartment's air conditioning had been broken for 3 weeks, but suddenly our landlord stopped answering calls entirely. The maintenance guy who usually helped us out whispered that he'd been told our unit wasn't a priority anymore. The mold in John's room was spreading up the wall, black spots creeping across the ceiling. I scrubbed it with bleach every night, but it always came back by morning. That Sunday at church, I noticed people watching us. Not the usual sympathetic looks we got as a single-parent family. These were different, calculating. 3 families approached me after service, pulling me aside near the parking lot where no one could overhear. Gloria went first. Her daughter Victoria had been Dr. Henderson's patient 2 years ago. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling, and played a recording she'd made secretly. Dr. Henderson's voice came through clear as day, telling 8-year-old Victoria that some people's teeth just rot faster due to genetics, that maybe her people should stop having so many kids if they couldn't afford proper dental care. Gloria had been too scared to report it. Her husband worked for a company that did business with the Hendersons. Robert's story was worse. His son had epilepsy, wore a medical bracelet just like John. During a routine cleaning, the boy had started showing seizure warning signs. Dr. Henderson told him to stop being dramatic. The boy had a grand mal seizure right there in the chair. They'd called 911 eventually, but not before letting him seize for almost 2 minutes because Dr. Henderson insisted he was faking. Robert showed me the emergency room bills, showed me the neurologist's report stating the delay in treatment had caused additional complications. The third family just cried. Their daughter wouldn't go to any dentist now, wouldn't even brush her teeth without panic attacks. By Tuesday, the whispers had started. Malcolm's girlfriend Dana worked at the state dental board, and she'd overheard Dr. Henderson's husband talking to board members. He was spreading rumors that I was substance seeking, that I'd coached John to fake his diabetic episode to score pain medication, that I was unstable and had threatened their family. Child Protective Services showed up Wednesday morning. The investigator looked around our spotless apartment, checked our fully stocked medicine cabinet, studied John's detailed diabetes management chart on the refrigerator. She seemed confused. The anonymous tip had described medical neglect, unsanitary conditions, substance abuse. She found none of that, but she said she'd have to come back. Standard procedure for follow-up visits. Thursday brought the accusation that ended my nursing career. The nursing home called to say I was under investigation for stealing medications. The theft had supposedly occurred on a day I'd been home with John during one of his bad days after the dental incident. I told them to check the security footage. They said the footage for that day had been corrupted. How convenient. Malcolm discovered his personnel file had been altered when HR called him in. Complaints dating back months had appeared. Complaints from dates when he'd been on vacation, from people who didn't exist. His union rep said fighting it would take months, maybe years. Our car insurance company called Friday. Policy canceled due to unreported incidents. What incidents? They couldn't say. Just that their risk assessment team had flagged our account. The pharmacy started having issues with John's insulin prescription, prior authorization problems, insurance verification delays. Each fix required hours on the phone, multiple trips, waiting while John's supplies dwindled. Gloria called me crying Saturday night. Victoria was suddenly failing her classes. Her teacher, who'd always praised her work, now found problems with everything. Robert lost his job at the factory. 15 years of perfect attendance meant nothing when the owner got a call from his golf buddy about problematic employees. The pattern was so clear it hurt, but proving coordination? That seemed impossible. We were just individual families facing individual problems. Who would believe a conspiracy theory about a small-town dentist with connections? Then Dr. Henderson made her first real mistake. Dana called me at midnight, whispering frantically. A group text had gone to the wrong number. Dr. Henderson had meant to send it to her inner circle, but had included a parent from another dental office by accident. The message was a goldmine. Detailed instructions about making these welfare queens regret messing with established families, specific names at CPS to call, which prescriptions to flag, which employers to pressure. The parent had screenshot everything before Dr. Henderson realized her mistake and tried to recall the message. Dana was taking a huge risk even telling me, but she'd been documenting things at the dental board for months. 15 years of sealed complaints against Dr. Henderson, a clear pattern of targeting Medicaid patients, especially children of color. One complaint from 2018 described an almost identical incident. A diabetic child denied care, humiliated, nearly dying in the chair. We met at a coffee shop the next day. Dana's hands shook as she slid copies across the table. Official complaints that had been buried, board members dismissing serious violations because Dr. Henderson was their kind of people, protected, untouchable. That's when I noticed Linda, Dr. Henderson's office manager, sitting in her car in the parking lot, crying. I approached carefully, expecting her to drive away. Instead, she rolled down her window. She'd been documenting everything for 3 years. The guilt was eating her alive. Photos of altered medical records, recordings of Dr. Henderson instructing staff to ignore medical alerts for certain patients, a detailed log showing which children were targeted and why. Always Medicaid kids, always minorities, always families who couldn't afford to fight back. But Linda was terrified. She had 2 kids of her own, a mortgage, no other medical office experience. Where would she go if she spoke up? The Henderson family escalated before we could decide our next move. Malcolm was arrested on fabricated assault charges. They claimed he'd threatened them during our confrontation at the dental office. The security footage from nearby businesses had mysteriously disappeared, but Dana had been recording everything at the dental board, including conversations where board members discussed protecting Dr. Henderson. She'd used her phone in her pocket, pretending to check messages while capturing their casual discrimination. John's crisis came 2 weeks later. I'd sent him to school with extra supplies, warned his teacher about the stress he'd been under, but the rumors had reached even there. When his glucose monitor started beeping during math class, when he asked to check his blood sugar, the nurse hesitated. One of the other teachers was live streaming a classroom activity on her private social media. She turned the camera toward the commotion, just as the nurse said she'd been warned John fakes episodes for attention. The nurse's hesitation lasted only seconds, but they felt like hours. John's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead as his hands started trembling. The teacher with the phone moved closer, still streaming, capturing every moment as my son struggled to stay upright in his chair. The nurse finally grabbed the emergency glucagon from the cabinet, but her movements were slow, uncertain. She kept glancing at the other staff members who'd gathered in the doorway, as if seeking permission. John slumped forward, barely conscious, while she fumbled with the injection. By the time the ambulance arrived, several parents had seen the live stream. The teacher hadn't realized how many people were watching her private account. Screen recordings started circulating within our community before she could delete the video. The nurse's words echoed through every share. I was warned John fakes episodes for attention. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor was furious. John's blood sugar had dropped to dangerous levels again. The delay in treatment could have caused permanent damage. While they stabilized him, I sat in that sterile waiting room making phone calls. First to Malcolm's lawyer about the false charges, then to Dana, who promised to add this incident to her growing file of evidence. The next morning brought more retaliation. The hospital administration suddenly discovered irregularities in my volunteer application from 3 years ago. They revoked my visitor privileges, meaning I couldn't accompany John to his appointments in their pediatric wing. The security guard who delivered this news looked ashamed, mumbling about orders from above. Gloria texted me that afternoon. Her daughter's teacher had called a parent conference, suggesting Victoria might need special education services despite her previous academic excellence. The teacher couldn't explain why a straight A student suddenly couldn't grasp basic concepts. When Gloria mentioned discrimination, the principal warned her about making unfounded accusations. Robert's situation deteriorated further. After losing his factory job, he'd applied everywhere in town. Each interview went well until the background check, then silence. One hiring manager, an old friend from high school, quietly told him there were whispers about him being a troublemaker. Someone was making calls, poisoning every opportunity. The third family from church, the Nguyens, finally shared their full story. Their daughter Thon had needed emergency dental surgery after Dr. Henderson's neglect caused an abscess. They'd paid thousands out of pocket at another clinic. When they tried to report it, their small restaurant faced surprise health inspections, 3 in 1 month. Each found minor violations that required expensive fixes. Dana risked another meeting, this time at a park outside town. She discovered something disturbing in the board's archives. Dr. Henderson's pattern went back decades, but every few years the complaints would stop. Not because she'd improved, but because families who spoke up faced systematic destruction until they moved away or gave up. She showed me a list. 23 families over 15 years. Most had relocated. Some lost custody battles. A few faced criminal charges that were later dropped but left permanent records. All had one thing in common. They'd filed complaints against Dr. Henderson. Linda reached out through Dana, too frightened to contact me directly. She wanted to help but needed protection. Her ex-husband had connections to the Henderson family. If she lost her job, he'd petition for full custody. She couldn't risk her children, but the guilt was destroying her. She'd started taking anxiety medication just to get through each day of watching Dr. Henderson hurt kids. The CPS visits intensified. Different investigators each time, all responding to new anonymous tips. One claimed I was leaving John alone during his medical episodes. Another said I was doctor shopping for pain medications. Each visit required hours of my time, documentation, proof that I was a fit mother. The investigators seemed embarrassed, going through motions they knew were pointless, but protocol demanded they investigate every claim. Malcolm's arrest case grew more complicated. The prosecutor, surprisingly, seemed reluctant to pursue it, but pressure from above kept the charges active. His lawyer discovered the alleged victim statements were nearly identical, as if scripted. 3 witnesses claimed Malcolm had threatened them, but security footage from the dental office's own cameras showed him never approaching those areas. Our apartment situation became unbearable. The mold spread despite my daily cleaning. John's breathing worsened. His diabetes became harder to control in the toxic environment. Other tenants whispered that maintenance had been instructed to ignore our requests. The landlord's nephew worked at the hospital with Dr. Henderson's husband. I started documenting everything obsessively. Every call, every denial of service, every suspicious incident. My phone filled with recordings, photos, screenshots. Gloria, Robert, and the Nguyens did the same. We created a shared cloud folder, backing up evidence in multiple locations. The pharmacy harassment escalated. treated. They'd claim insurance issues, then say the prescription was expired, then insist the dosage was wrong. Each problem required calls to doctors, insurance companies, hours of John missing school while we sorted it out. One pharmacist quietly slipped me a note. They're watching. Try the pharmacy 2 towns over. Dr. Henderson grew bolder. She showed up at the grocery store while I was shopping, following me through aisles, making loud comments about welfare fraud to whoever would listen. When I started recording, she'd smile and walk away, always careful to stay just within legal boundaries. Her husband's influence at the hospital created new problems. John's endocrinologist suddenly had no available appointments. The diabetes educator who'd worked with us for years transferred to another department. Referrals to specialists got lost. Prior authorizations vanished from the system. Dana discovered Dr. Henderson had filed a preemptive complaint with the dental board, claiming I was harassing her. The complaint painted me as unstable, seeking money, coaching my child to fake medical emergencies. Board members were already discussing it in closed sessions, treating it as fact despite no investigation. The school situation worsened. John faced daily scrutiny from staff members who'd heard the rumors. They questioned every bathroom break, doubted every symptom, hesitated during legitimate medical needs. He stopped telling them when he felt low blood sugar coming on, terrified of being accused of faking. Linda finally broke. She called me sobbing one night, saying she couldn't watch another child suffer. She'd seen Dr. Henderson turn away a 5-year-old with obvious tooth pain because the mother questioned a treatment plan. The child left crying, infection spreading, while Dr. Henderson laughed about teaching uppity parents their place. We arranged to meet at a truck stop 40 miles away. Linda brought boxes of evidence, years of altered records, recordings of staff meetings where Dr. Henderson explicitly instructed them to ignore medical alerts from certain patients, photos of children in distress while treatment continued, lists of families targeted for their race, income, or willingness to advocate for their kids. But she was terrified of testifying. Her ex had already started making threats, somehow knowing she was considering speaking out. The Henderson network ran deep. Everyone owed someone a favor. Everyone had something to lose. The false arrest charges against Malcolm moved forward despite the weak evidence. His public defender warned that the judge assigned to the case golfed with Dr. Henderson's husband. The prosecutor kept offering plea deals for crimes Malcolm didn't commit, trying to force him into accepting a record that would end his security career. John developed anxiety about any medical setting. He'd panic at the sight of anyone in scrubs. His diabetes management suffered as he resisted checking blood sugar in public, afraid someone would accuse him of faking. The trauma from the dental office spread into every aspect of his medical care. I lost my remaining nursing home shifts after refusing to work a schedule that would leave John alone during his vulnerable hours. They called it job abandonment. I called it protecting my child. Without income, paying for John's supplies became desperate. I sold everything valuable we owned, maxed out credit cards, borrowed from family. Gloria's daughter Victoria started having nightmares about dentists. Her grades plummeted as teachers found fault with everything. The family considered moving but couldn't afford to leave. Robert applied for jobs in neighboring towns, but the Whisper network reached there too. Then Nguyen's restaurant faced another inspection, this time finding violations that would cost more than they had. Dr. Henderson made her second mistake during a professional conference. After a few drinks, she bragged to colleagues about putting certain families in their place. One dentist, appalled by her casual racism, recorded the conversation. He sent it to Dana anonymously, afraid to be identified but unable to stay silent. The recording was damning. Dr. Henderson detailed her system for identifying problem families, low income, too educated about their rights, willing to question treatment. She laughed about the boy who seized in her chair, calling it a lesson for his parents. She mentioned John by name, said his mother needed to learn respect for her betters. Dana compiled everything into a comprehensive report. 15 years of complaints, audio recordings, altered documents, pattern evidence. But she needed more than one family's story to make it undeniable. She needed all of us to come forward together, publicly, with our evidence. The risk felt enormous. We'd all seen what happened to families who spoke up alone, but together, maybe we had a chance. Gloria worried about her husband's job. Robert had already lost his. The Nguyens feared for their business. I had nothing left to lose except John, and they were already trying to take him. Dr. Henderson's third mistake came from overconfidence. She sent another group text, this time about the upcoming dental board review. She didn't realize one number belonged to a former employee who'd quit in disgust years earlier. The message outlined exactly how they'd discredit any complaints, which board members would help, who to pressure at CPS for maximum impact. The former employee forwarded it to every family on Dr. Henderson's target list. Suddenly, we weren't alone. 12 more families came forward with similar stories. Years of abuse, children traumatized, families destroyed for speaking up, all documented, all connected by one common factor: Dr. Henderson's hatred for anyone she deemed beneath her. We met in secret at a church in the next county. 20 families crowded into a Sunday school room, sharing evidence, comparing notes. The pattern was undeniable. The same tactics, the same network of enablers, the same destruction of anyone who dared complain. Linda arrived halfway through, shaking but determined. She'd made copies of everything. Security footage Dr. Henderson thought was deleted, patient files showing altered treatment notes, financial records indicating insurance fraud. She'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment, waiting for enough families to stand together. The Henderson network noticed our organizing. The harassment intensified. Malcolm's car tires were slashed. My apartment received an eviction notice for lease violations that didn't exist. Gloria's husband got suspended from work pending an investigation into false allegations. Robert's wife lost her job at the school cafeteria, but we kept meeting, keep documenting. Dana worked overtime preparing the formal complaint. She knew she'd lose her job the moment she filed it, but she'd seen too much to stay silent. The evidence package grew thicker each day. More families found courage to contribute their stories. Dr. Henderson's husband made a critical error. He called Dana directly, trying to intimidate her, threatened her career, her reputation, her future in the state. He didn't know she was recording, didn't know his explicit threats and admission of coordinating the harassment would become evidence. The school nurse who'd hesitated with John faced her own crisis of conscience. She came to our apartment one evening crying. She'd been told John was manipulative, that I coached him to fake emergencies, but seeing him nearly lose consciousness had shaken her. She offered to testify about the pressure she'd faced to ignore his medical needs. Our lawyer, working pro bono after hearing our story, started filing preservation notices. No more mysteriously deleted footage, no more lost documents. The Henderson network's usual tactics became harder to execute under legal scrutiny, but they had one more card to play. CPS arrived with an emergency removal order. Anonymous tips had escalated to claims of immediate danger. They gave me 2 hours to pack John's things. No explanation of specific allegations, just vague concerns about medical care and stability. I called our lawyer while packing John's diabetes supplies, trying not to let him see me crying. The social worker seemed uncomfortable, kept apologizing, saying her supervisor supervisor had insisted on immediate action. She mentioned carefully that the order had come from unusually high up, that someone was very interested in this case, that maybe I should be careful who I trusted, but she also whispered something else. The judge who'd signed the order had a reputation. Several of his removals had been overturned on appeal. If I could hang on, if I could fight, there might be hope. She couldn't say more, but her eyes conveyed what her words couldn't. Malcolm drove us to the CPS office, his own legal troubles temporarily forgotten in the face of losing John. My baby clung to me in the waiting room, understanding enough to be terrified. His blood sugar spiked from stress. I showed the social workers his medical needs, his careful management routine, praying they'd place him somewhere that understood diabetes. The placement fell through at the last minute. The foster family suddenly unavailable. Then the backup placement. Then the emergency shelter claimed they couldn't handle medical needs. The social worker made call after call, growing more frustrated. It seemed no placement in the county could take a diabetic child on such short notice. Finally, she sighed and stamped some papers. Temporary reprieve. John could stay with me for the weekend while they sorted out placement. Court hearing Monday morning. She looked relieved, as if she'd been hoping for this outcome all along, as if maybe the system still had people who recognized injustice when they saw it. That weekend, everything accelerated. Dana filed the formal complaint with the state board, copying federal authorities on civil rights violations. 23 families signed as complainants. Linda submitted her evidence directly to investigators. The former employee who'd forwarded the group text came forward publicly. Dr. Henderson's response was swift and vicious. She held a press conference claiming she was being targeted by substance-seeking parents and disgruntled former employees. She painted herself as a victim of reverse discrimination, a successful professional under attack for maintaining standards. Some people believed her, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recorded conversations, the documented patterns, the financial records showing insurance fraud, the testimony of multiple employees about explicit instructions to ignore medical emergencies, the group texts outlining coordinated harassment. It all painted a clear picture of systematic discrimination and abuse. Sunday night, Dr. Henderson made her final mistake. She came to our apartment complex, pounding on doors, demanding to know who was spreading lies about her. She screamed racial slurs in the parking lot, threatened families in front of their children, completely lost the controlled facade she'd maintained for years. Multiple neighbors called 911. Several recorded her meltdown. She grabbed one father who tried to walk past her, screaming about ungrateful welfare leeches destroying hardworking families. When police arrived, she turned on them too, invoking her husband's name, demanding they arrest everyone who'd complained about her. The officers, faced with a clearly unstable woman assaulting people in a parking lot, had no choice but to arrest her. The video spread through social media within hours. Dr. Henderson's careful image crumbled as people watched her scream about teaching those people to know their place. Monday morning's court hearing took an unexpected turn. The judge, reviewing the CPS file, noted the suspicious timing, the lack of specific allegations, the pattern of complaints from the same source. He ordered John to remain with me pending a full investigation. He also ordered CPS to investigate whether their system was being weaponized for harassment. The dental board convened an emergency session that afternoon. Faced with evidence they couldn't ignore and public pressure from the viral videos, they suspended Dr. Henderson's license pending investigation. Her practice couldn't operate without her license. The office closed that day, staff members scrambling to find new jobs. But we knew this was just the beginning. The Henderson network remained intact. The false charges against Malcolm still stood. Families still faced employment discrimination and housing retaliation. The system that enabled decades of abuse hadn't changed overnight. We'd won a battle, but the war for justice continued. John still flinched at medical settings, still panicked when his glucose monitor beeped in public. The trauma didn't disappear with Dr. Henderson's suspension. Gloria's daughter remained in unnecessary special education. Robert still couldn't find work. The Nguyens restaurant struggled under the weight of repeated inspections and repairs. Linda, finally free from Dr. Henderson's employ, struggled with guilt over the years she'd stayed silent. She started therapy, trying to process her role in enabling abuse. Her ex-husband filed for emergency custody as threatened, using her cooperation with investigators as evidence of instability. The federal investigation moved slowly. Civil rights violations required proof of intentional discrimination. Despite clear patterns, proving intent remained challenging. Dr. Henderson hired expensive lawyers who painted her actions as standard practice disagreements, not targeted harassment. Our coalition of families grew stronger through shared struggle. We met weekly, supporting each other through ongoing retaliation. When one family faced eviction, others helped them move. When someone lost a job, we shared resources and connections. The community Dr. Henderson had tried to destroy became our greatest strength. Dana lost her job at the dental board as expected, but she'd prepared for this, saving evidence, building connections with other whistleblowers. She started consulting for families facing medical discrimination, using her inside knowledge to help others navigate the system. Her sacrifice inspired others to speak up. The school nurse who'd hesitated with John became an unexpected ally. She testified about the pressure she'd faced, the explicit instructions to doubt certain children. Her testimony carried weight because she'd initially believed the lies. Her transformation from enabler to advocate proved how insidious the discrimination was. More healthcare workers came forward, dental assistants who'd quit rather than participate, hygienists who'd been fired for showing compassion, office staff who'd watched children suffer in silence. Each story added weight to our case, showing this wasn't isolated incidents but systematic abuse. Dr. Henderson's husband's influence began to wane as the scandal grew. Hospital board members distanced themselves. Golf buddies stopped returning calls. The network of favors and intimidation weakened as people feared association with public disgrace. Some even began cooperating with investigators to save themselves. Malcolm's charges were quietly dropped when the prosecutor reviewed the evidence, or lack thereof. The witnesses couldn't keep their stories straight without Dr. Henderson's coordination. Security footage that mysteriously reappeared showed Malcolm never threatened anyone. His record remained clean, but the months of stress had taken their toll. We learned that Dr. Henderson's dental practice had been built on more than just discrimination. Insurance fraud investigations revealed years of unnecessary procedures on children who couldn't advocate for themselves, billing for services never provided, using cheaper materials while charging for premium ones. The financial crimes might succeed where discrimination charges struggled. The apartment complex, facing potential lawsuits over the discriminatory maintenance practices, suddenly fixed our air conditioning. The mold remediation crew arrived within days. Other tenants reported similar sudden improvements. Fear of liability accomplished what months of complaints couldn't, but John still suffered. The medical trauma layered onto his daily diabetes management created constant anxiety. He needed therapy, but feared healthcare settings. We found a therapist who would meet at a park, slowly building trust outside clinical environments. Progress came slowly, measured in small victories like checking blood sugar without panic. The viral videos of Dr. Henderson's parking lot meltdown had unexpected consequences. Families from neighboring towns recognized her rhetoric. More complaints surfaced. The pattern expanded beyond our county. State investigators realized they were looking at decades of systematic discrimination across multiple jurisdictions. Our lawyer connected us with civil rights organizations. What started as individual families seeking justice became a larger case about medical discrimination. The evidence we'd gathered showed how personal prejudice combined with institutional power could destroy lives. It wasn't just about one bad dentist anymore. Some community members still supported Dr. Henderson. They held rallies about the war on successful professionals, claimed reverse discrimination, painted her as a victim of cancel culture. But their arguments weakened each time new evidence surfaced. Each family testimony, each documented incident, each recording of her own words. The Henderson family's retaliation became desperate. Anonymous threats, frivolous lawsuits, attempts to discredit witnesses. But we'd learned their tactics. We documented everything, recorded every interaction. The paper trail of harassment became evidence of consciousness of guilt. 6 months after that first parking lot confrontation, the state dental board made their ruling. Dr. Henderson's license was permanently revoked. The pattern of discrimination, patient endangerment, and insurance fraud left no room for redemption. She could never practice dentistry again in our state. The federal investigation concluded that systematic civil rights violations had occurred. The Department of Justice issued guidelines for preventing discriminatory practices in healthcare settings. Our cases became training examples for what not to do. Real change, slow but meaningful, began. Financial settlements followed. Not wealth, but enough to cover damages. Enough to help families relocate if they chose. Enough to pay for John's therapy and the specialized medical care he needed to feel safe again. The money mattered less than the acknowledgement that we'd been wronged. Dr. Henderson faced criminal charges for insurance fraud and assault from the parking lot incident. Her husband resigned from the hospital board in disgrace. Their influence network crumbled as former allies distanced themselves. The powerful family that had terrorized our community for decades finally faced consequences. But justice felt incomplete. Years of trauma couldn't be erased by settlements or revoked licenses. Children remained afraid of dentists. Families struggled to rebuild after lost jobs and damaged credit. The scars, physical and emotional, would last long after the headlines faded. We kept meeting as a support group, sharing resources, celebrating small victories. When Victoria finally improved her grades, when Robert found a job 3 towns over, when the Nguyens restaurant thrived without constant harassment, when John made it through a doctor's appointment without panic, Linda found peace in advocacy. She worked with the state board to develop new reporting procedures. Her insider knowledge helped create safeguards against future abuse. She still carried guilt, but channeled it into preventing others from enabling discrimination through silence. Dana became a national advocate for medical whistleblowers. She testified before committees about the need for protection systems. Her sacrifice inspired policy changes that might protect future healthcare workers who spoke up. She said losing her job was worth it to prevent another John. The nurse who'd hesitated with John implemented new protocols at the school. Medical alerts were never to be questioned. Any doubt meant immediate treatment while verifying. She trained other nurses about unconscious bias and the danger of believing rumors over medical evidence. She couldn't undo her hesitation, but could prevent others from making the same mistake. Our story spread beyond our community. Other families recognized similar patterns in their own towns. Dental boards in neighboring states opened investigations. Medical professionals examined their own biases. The conversation about discrimination in healthcare grew louder because we'd refused to be silenced. John slowly healed. Therapy helped him separate medical care from trauma. He learned to advocate for himself again, to trust that his glucose monitor would be believed, that his medical needs were valid, that no one should have the power to deny him life-saving care based on prejudice. The empty dental office became a reminder. Dr. Henderson's name removed from the sign. Windows dark. Parking lot empty. Some wanted it torn down. Others said it should stand as a warning. A monument to what happens when power combines with prejudice and no one speaks up. We chose to focus on the future. On the families who found courage to speak up. On the healthcare workers who chose compassion over compliance. On the investigators who pursued justice despite pressure. On the community that came together when systems failed us. The Henderson family left town eventually. Their house sold quietly. Their social circles dissolved. They moved somewhere their name didn't carry the weight of shame, but we knew they'd carry the knowledge of what they'd done. That somewhere, they'd remember the families they'd tried to destroy, who'd instead destroyed them. Our coalition formally organized as an advocacy group. We created resources for families facing medical discrimination, guides for documenting incidents, lists of lawyers who'd take cases, support networks for those afraid to speak up alone. We became what we'd needed when this started. John returned to school without fear. His teachers, properly trained now, responded appropriately to his medical needs. He made friends who understood his diabetes. He even started educating others about invisible disabilities. The scared boy from the parking lot grew into a confident advocate. The other children recovered at their own pace. Some needed years of therapy. Others found healing through activism. All carried the knowledge that they'd survived something terrible and emerged stronger. Their parents' courage in speaking up had protected future children from similar trauma. We held an annual gathering on the anniversary of that first parking lot confrontation, not to celebrate trauma, but to acknowledge survival. To remind ourselves that ordinary families could stand up to extraordinary abuse, that documentation and determination could topple decades of discrimination. Dr. Henderson appealed her license revocation. The hearing became a final showcase of her lack of remorse. She blamed everyone but herself, claimed conspiracy, denied documented incidents. The appeals board not only upheld the revocation, but recommended criminal investigation into perjury. Some community members who'd supported her finally understood. Seeing the evidence laid out in court, hearing testimony from dozens of families, watching her inability to acknowledge any wrongdoing, they quietly apologized for enabling her through their silence or support. The ripple effects continued for years. Medical schools added our case to ethics courses. Dental boards nationwide strengthened oversight. Insurance companies implemented better fraud detection. CPS created protocols to identify weaponized reports. Systems slowly changed because we'd exposed their failures. But the greatest victory was smaller, more personal. It was John checking his blood sugar without fear. Gloria's daughter smiling at a new dentist. Robert working again with dignity. The Nguyens serving customers without constant worry. Families living without the shadow of retaliation. We'd learned that justice isn't instant. It's built through documentation, persistence, and solidarity. Through refusing to be silenced when power tries to crush truth. Through supporting each other when systems fail. Through believing that ordinary people can create extraordinary change. The hit-up Honda from that first day still sat in our parking lot. We could afford better now, but kept it as a reminder of where we'd started, of what we'd survived, of how far we'd come. John sometimes sat in the back seat, no longer longer shaking, no longer afraid. Our story wasn't unique. Across the country, families faced similar discrimination. But our response was becoming a model. Organize, document, support each other. Refuse to be isolated. Refuse to be silenced. Refuse to let prejudice hide behind professional credentials. The dental board's emergency meeting stretched into the evening. I sat outside with 20 other families. John pressed against my side, his glucose monitor beeping softly. Through the glass doors, we could see board members reviewing stacks of evidence Linda had provided. Dr. Henderson's lawyer kept objecting, but even he looked defeated as more documentation emerged. Malcolm arrived straight from the courthouse where his charges had been formally dismissed. The prosecutor had discovered that the 3 witnesses who claimed he'd threatened them had all received payments from a company owned by Dr. Henderson's brother-in-law. Bank records don't lie, even when people do. The board members filed out at 8:30, faces grim. The chairman read from prepared notes, voice steady but strained. Dr. Henderson's license was suspended immediately pending full investigation. Her practice would close within 24 hours. Patients would need to find new providers. The decision was unanimous. Dr. Henderson erupted from her seat, screaming about conspiracies and reverse discrimination. Her lawyer tried to quiet her, but she shoved past him, pointing at each of us in turn. She knew our names, our addresses, our children's schools. The security guard stepped between us as she lunged toward Gloria. That's when Linda stood up from the back row. She'd been sitting alone, away from both sides. Her voice shook but carried clearly through the room. She announced she'd turned over 3 years of documentation to federal investigators that morning. Financial records, altered patient files, recorded conversations, everything. Dr. Henderson went pale. Her husband grabbed her arm, whispering urgently. They left through the side door, her heels clicking frantically on the tile. We sat in stunned silence for a moment before Gloria's daughter Victoria started clapping, slow at first, then picking up as others joined in. Not celebration exactly, more like acknowledgement that something had finally shifted. The next morning, the dental office was chaos. Staff members arrived to find the doors locked, a notice from the state board taped to the glass. Some cried, others looked relieved. One hygienist approached me in the parking lot, admitting she'd been looking for another job for months but felt trapped. She had her own stories about children Dr. Henderson had hurt. John's school called before lunch. The nurse who'd hesitated during his crisis wanted to meet with us. I expected another round of blame shifting, but she surprised me. She'd created new protocols for medical emergencies, requiring immediate response regardless of any warnings about students. She'd also scheduled training for all staff on recognizing and responding to diabetic emergencies. The apartment complex suddenly became responsive. Within 2 days, maintenance fixed not just our air conditioning, but also the leaking pipes, broken locks, and faulty wiring they'd ignored for months. The property manager claimed it was routine maintenance, but we all knew better. Fear of lawsuits motivated what complaints never could. Robert got a call from a factory 2 towns over. They'd heard about his situation through a friend of a friend. The interview was straightforward. No mysterious background check delays. He started the following Monday. Better pay than his previous job. Sometimes good people step up when they hear about injustice. The Nguyens restaurant saw an unexpected surge in customers. Word had spread through social media about their struggle. People drove from neighboring counties to show support, then helped her parents serve tables, no longer afraid to be seen in public. Business was better than ever. Dana met with federal investigators for 6 hours, providing context for every document, every pattern, every family affected. She'd kept meticulous records, anticipating this day. Her former colleagues at the dental board were scrambling to distance themselves from decisions they'd rubber-stamped for years. Dr. Henderson's husband resigned from the hospital board before they could vote him out. The resignation letter was brief, citing personal reasons, but everyone knew the real reason. His influence evaporated overnight as former allies pretended they'd never enabled his wife's behavior. Malcolm returned to work with full back pay. His supervisor apologized privately, admitting the pressure had come from the very top. Several security footage files that had been declared corrupted suddenly became accessible again. They showed exactly what we'd said all along. Malcolm never threatened anyone. The nursing home called about my job. They'd reconsidered the medication theft allegations after reviewing their inventory system. Turned out their counts had been off for months due to a software glitch. They offered me my position back with a raise. I negotiated for better hours that worked with John's needs. Gloria's daughter was reassessed by an independent education specialist. Unsurprisingly, she tested at advanced levels in every subject. The principal apologized for the misunderstanding, promising Victoria would return to her regular classes immediately. Some apologies felt hollow, but at least the damage was being undone. More families emerged from the shadows. A mother from the next county drove 2 hours to share her story. Her son had needed emergency dental surgery after Dr. Henderson dismissed his abscess pain as attention-seeking. Another family had moved away entirely after facing similar retaliation. The pattern was bigger than even we'd realized. Linda met with prosecutors, providing detailed testimony about insurance fraud schemes. She'd photocopied billing records showing charges for procedures never performed, premium materials billed but cheaper alternatives used, children under anesthesia for longer than necessary to maximize billing. The financial crimes would be easier to prove than discrimination. Dr. Henderson's arrest happened on a Thursday morning. Federal agents arrived at her home with warrants for insurance fraud, tax evasion, and civil rights violations. Neighbors watched from their windows as she was led out in handcuffs, still insisting everyone was lying. Her husband followed in a separate car, his own legal troubles mounting. The empty dental office became a symbol. Some wanted it converted to a community health center. Others suggested a memorial to affected families. For now, it stood empty, her name already removed from the sign. A reminder that actions have consequences, even if justice takes time. John started seeing a therapist who specialized in medical trauma. The first sessions were in a park, then gradually moved to an office designed to look nothing like a medical facility. Progress was slow, but real. He stopped flinching when his glucose monitor beeped, started trusting that adults would believe him about his medical needs. Our coalition formalized into a support and advocacy group. We created resource packets for families facing medical discrimination, phone trees for emergency support, a fund to help with legal fees. What started as shared trauma became shared strength. We couldn't change what happened, but we could prevent it from happening to others. The state implemented new oversight procedures for medical licensing boards. Anonymous complaints would be investigated by independent reviewers. Patterns of discrimination would trigger automatic audits. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Our pain had exposed systemic failures that needed fixing. 6 months later, Dr. Henderson pled guilty to multiple counts of insurance fraud. The civil rights charges were harder to prove, but the financial crimes carried serious penalties. She faced up to 15 years in federal prison. Her husband was charged as an accomplice for helping hide assets. Their house went up for sale to pay legal fees and restitution. The other families slowly rebuilt. Gloria's daughter excelled in school again. Robert's new job provided better insurance. The Nguyens expanded their restaurant. Even Each small victory felt monumental after what we'd endured. We celebrated together, understanding the weight of ordinary moments. Malcolm proposed to Dana at our support group meeting. She'd risked everything to help us, and he'd fallen in love with her courage. She said yes while everyone cheered. Sometimes fighting injustice together creates bonds stronger than any hardship can break. The dental board permanently revoked Dr. Henderson's license after reviewing all evidence. She could never practice dentistry again anywhere in the country. The decision set precedent for how boards should handle patterns of discrimination. Other states began reviewing their own procedures. John returned to school full-time, confident in managing his diabetes. His teachers knew to trust his medical alerts. The nurse kept glucose tablets in her office specifically for him. He even gave a presentation about living with type 1 diabetes, educating his classmates about invisible disabilities. We held our first anniversary meeting in the church where we'd initially gathered in secret. This time, we met openly, sharing updates and resources. New families joined, facing different but related challenges. We'd become a model for grassroots organizing against institutional discrimination. Dr. Henderson's sentencing made the local news. 8 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, tax evasion, and civil rights violations. She'd shown no remorse, blaming everyone but herself until the end. Her husband got 3 years for his role in hiding assets and coordinating retaliation. Linda testified at the sentencing, describing the guilt she'd carried for years. Her courage in coming forward had made the difference. She now worked at a pediatric clinic that served low-income families, using her experience to advocate for patients. Redemption came through action, not just regret. The settlement negotiations took months but resulted in fair compensation for affected families. Not life-changing money, but enough to cover damages, medical bills, and therapy costs. More importantly, it included requirements for systemic changes in how complaints were handled. John and I moved to a better apartment using part of our settlement. No mold, working appliances, a responsive landlord, simple things that felt like luxuries after what we'd endured. He decorated his room with diabetes awareness posters, no longer ashamed of his condition. Other dental practices in town reported increased scrutiny of their billing practices. Some cleaned up questionable procedures on their own, others faced audits. The culture of impunity that had protected Dr. Henderson for decades was finally crumbling.